He's the Assistant Executive Director for the New Jersey Council on Compulsive Gambling. He graduated from the College of New Jersey with a BS in Finance and concentration in Economics. He also holds his MS in Psychology from California Coast University. He's spoken at dozens of events around the country about internet and mobile device gambling, as well as emerging trends in sports gambling. And whether he's speaking on prevention strategies, treatment resources, responsible gaming, or recovery sources, Dan discusses the concept of gambling addiction switching, co-occurring disorders, and behaviors associated with this horrible, devastating addiction. And as I always said, and I mean this, Dan, you're a great speaker. You've got a lot of passion, and you're very informed as well. So I always love hearing you. I don't think I've heard this talk, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And if you guys heard Dan and I's commentary, you probably heard our take on, it sounded like Dan missed a lot of what happened. He was out doing the right thing out there, hiking and getting some great exercise. But I just hope everybody's safe and okay where you're at there in the great state of North Carolina. And please stay safe regarding the COVID and what's happening in our world today. But we talked a little bit about that, but it's good to hear from him, and it's good to have him on today. And I'm going to turn it over to you now, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Robbie. And again, you've just been wonderful through all this, just having the chance. And this is the first chance that we get a chance to actually see each other. And, it's funny, when COVID first started, I didn't mind being on camera because I had just gotten my hair cut in mid-March. But now as the time has gone on, I feel like Goldilocks. I feel like I'm letting my hair down. Even though that's not the case, it's terrible. And I'm envious of you, Robbie. I really am.
No. Thank you. You look great. All right, man.
All right. So thank you all and welcome. It's good to see familiar names on the chat. I know I was chatting with Allison. It's good to see you virtually, Allison. There's so many great folks on the webinar today. Some I've had the privilege to email or see at conferences or chat with when I was in North Carolina with Cam Adair and Julie Hines last year. And even though our plans changed this year, we weren't able to be together in person, we've still been working with the state of North Carolina. And what I've found that's great about this time is that it does open up the doors to almost connect with more people virtually. People that may not have been able to attend an event are able to just log in, sign in, register, and attend through the comfort of their own home or wherever they may be, and still gain important information. Because at a time when there's physical isolation, it doesn't mean there has to be social isolation. And we're able to spend this next, less than an hour together, and it's important. And the topic we're talking about kind of ties in some fashion, to world events. It's just not about gambling. It's just not about substance use. It's just not about an eating disorder. It's not just about internet pornography. It's about something at a deeper level. And this topic is one that I guess started working on. I've been with the council now over 5 years in New Jersey, and as the assistant director, been making my way through the ranks. And I started just really thinking about how we were breaking down silos. When I first started in 2015, in the state of New Jersey, there was strict delineation. You're siloed. We are substance only. We don't treat process addiction. Or if you had a process addiction, we don't talk about substance here. That's not the place. Go over to talk to drug and alcohol counselors. And there just wasn't this connection between addictions. Yes, we recognize there is addiction switching. We recognize that someone who's in recovery from drug or alcohol or substance use disorder can easily switch into gambling. Someone in recovery from gambling can switch to substance. And why is that? Well, because what we've learned over time, and what many of us already knew, is that just because our funding streams have to go to one area, that's not how human behavior works. And so if someone grows up around all of these things, they might take one and they develop a problem with it. And now all of a sudden they switch to another addiction. And so I started really thinking about the concept of the dis-ease of addiction in general. And you take the word disease and you break it down into two words. There's a dis-ease. And what is not at ease within each and every one of us? Not just those who struggle with addiction. There's many people out there in the world right now not struggling with addiction that just are not at ease. There's something not at ease. They're not comfortable spiritually, behaviorally, economically, financially. Relationship status. any number of things can be not at ease at any given time. And what happens is, if someone then starts turning to the solution of drugs or alcohol or gambling, well, that solution can start to become a problem when you start indulging in it too often, too frequently, too fast, etc. So today we're going to take a look at addiction from a slightly different perspective. And this is some work I've done with Pennsylvania, Delaware, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey. We've done different elements of this in different states, ranging from 60-minute workshops like we're doing today, all the way up to 6 hours. I've actually done this workshop for 6 hours for the state of Delaware, and it was fairly well received. So let's talk today about the dis-ease of gambling addiction and principles of recovery. There's a lot to cover, and any of you that have heard me speak in the past, I will always make my slides available to you on a PDF. And I think now more than ever, it's important to make that information available, because people, generally speaking, will have a little bit more time, even for the simple fact that if you're still working as much as you were before, you're maybe not commuting. So you're getting even the drive time back. So people do find they have some more hours perhaps in their day. And I've had great conversations after workshops where people will reach out and email me or call and ask what I meant about a particular slide or a bullet point. I love having that dialogue. I'm fairly accessible. Even though we have been extremely busy in the state of New Jersey with gambling, gambling is shut down, as we know, around the country, but it doesn't mean that gambling has stopped completely. And the behaviors and the elements of gambling are still alive and strong. Some of the other workshops I've done center around sports gambling. Even though traditional sports are on pause and slowly coming back, you still have Korean baseball. You still have video game tournaments called esports. You have daily fantasy sports contests where you can pick players from The Bachelor or Survivor or reality TV shows. So there's a number of competitions that are still going on to generate interest, and our helpline is still ringing for people who are struggling. So today we're going to cover a lot of different elements. If we may or may not get through all of it. Whatever we don't get through, it's okay. I will always be sure I get through the stuff that I need to get through to give a well-rounded 1-hour workshop. So let's first understand about gambling disorder and the DSM-5. DSM-5 is a diagnostic manual. It's in the United States. Gambling disorder was classified in 2013. It was changed from compulsive to disordered. And it was also the first time there was a non-substance related disorder added to the DSM. And it was the first. And what was key with the DSM-5 change is that in the prior versions of DSM, if you were looking at someone who had a gambling problem, compulsive gambling, one of the 10 criteria was that they had to commit an illegal act in order to be diagnosed as having the condition. That was removed in the 2013 revision. We know many people who have a gambling problem, gambling disorder, that do not commit or may never commit illegal acts, yet they still have the gambling disorder. So that was a critical removal, and now there's 9 elements of DSM for gambling. So gambling is a formally recognized disorder. It's real, it has a diagnostic code. It's not just someone who's weak-willed or money hungry, if you will. It's someone who's struggling and suffering. And what they use is their outlet. And gambling is the thing that they do to alleviate stress, to remove themselves from a negative mood state, much like someone who struggles with alcohol use or drug or substance use. What's interesting, when you take a look, though, at the stigma of addiction, gambling is one of those that carries a high stigma. You can't see track marks on someone's arm who's a gambler, who's been struggling with gambling disorder. You can't smell it on their breath. You can't see it in their eyes oftentimes. There's no visible signs or symptoms, but it's still a formal disorder. It's still an addiction and has a high stigma attached. You know, I love the last quote here that you see. I wish people saw the time that addicts spent alone, thinking about everything they've done every time they've lied and stole. Remember, a person who struggles with gambling doesn't just steal money. They steal time. They steal trust. They steal safety. They steal security. So they steal a lot of different things from people. It doesn't always have to do with money. So when we talk about today's topic, the dis-ease of gambling addiction and the dis-ease of general addiction, let's just spin it back even earlier. If you were to think in your own life, what do you use to cover pain in your life? What do you use? And, this is one of those elements where this is a great interactive workshop because we share openly. You have a room full of people, and this is where the hands will be raised, and people will be saying, I exercise too much to cover the pain in my life. I eat, I drink, I smoke, I laugh. There's a lot of different things that people will use to cover pain because we wear a mask. I actually did this workshop in Delaware on Halloween, and it was just kind of ironic because the concept of wearing a mask and Halloween, we had a 15-minute discussion about covering pain in our life around that concept of Halloween. And it's wonderful when you can get 30 clinicians in a room thinking of very deeply and at a very high level to see where they go with certain questions. So we use all various elements to cover pain in our life. And there's a couple of thoughts or observations that kind of emerge from this. And here are some thoughts that I've heard over time from doing workshops, working with people who are in recovery, working with people who are struggling. Some observations. First one, if I can keep going fast enough, for a little while, I can at least outrun the fear and the anxiety of the pain, right? The pain is chasing me, but if I keep going fast enough, I will not slow down and I will not have to think about this. But it's only for a little while. Because what we know is anyone that runs, and I know Robbie can appreciate this, if you're a runner, you're going to get tired. You're going to get tired of running. You're going to get tired. You get what was the phrase? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And eventually you just want a different change. You want to change a pace. You want to add more tools to your tool belt. You want to become in better shape, if you will, so that you don't have to run as fast or as hard, or you can maybe face the thing that you're running from. Another thought or observation, silence is the enemy. See, that's important for people early on in their recovery from any addiction. Oftentimes it's recommended, do not always have something to do. Have a number to call, have a job to do. Don't sit endlessly in the silence or in the darkness because that can send you back to a negative state, can send you right back. Silence is the enemy. The problem is, though, and number three, we have these thoughts that we can fill with endless activity, but then that points back to number one. Because then if you're always filling with endless activity and you keep going fast enough, then you're only outrunning the fear and the anxiety of the pain for a little while. So do you understand why early on silence is the enemy? You want to fill it with activity, but it can't be endless activity. Ultimately, you have to address the dis-ease. We cannot always avoid the dis-ease. We try to, but we can't. And so at some point down the road along the recovery process, we need to come to terms with what is the true nature. Why was I drinking? We know the 12-step rooms, especially in Gamblers Anonymous, there's a question in the yellow handbook. Is it important to know why I gambled in the first place? That is one of the questions that they will read in a GA meeting. And the answer in the handbook says, not necessarily, right? And that doesn't say yes, doesn't say no. It says not necessarily. You know why? Because it's on a case-by-case basis. Early on, it's really not important to know why you gambled. Right now, just have the desire to not gamble anymore. And again, have the desire. It says have the desire. It doesn't say to stop gambling. It says to have the desire to stop gambling. It's a big difference. And so the most important thing is to have the desire. As you become mature in your walk and as you become further along in your recovery process, some people then pursue knowledge and wisdom to try to figure out what is it that I was afraid of? Why did I feel the need to gamble? What was not at ease within my life where I chose the outlet of gambling or drugs or alcohol or a multiple of things, right? So it's a different walk for every individual, but that is some of the thinking process that we typically see as someone who's going through their journey. So what ties in with gambling addiction? Well, you can replace this with alcohol, with narcotics, any addiction, actually. Whether it's social behavior all the way down to financial, spiritual, mental, physiological, there are some number of things that are not at ease, right? Something's not at ease. Maybe I don't like my social standing. Maybe I'm in a bad relationship. Maybe my financial condition. We know for a gambler, someone who struggles with gambling addiction, we know the financial condition oftentimes is a big, big problem. And it's also what keeps a gambler coming back for more. Because if you think about the nature of gambling addiction, remember, it's an intermittent reward schedule. So every so often, a person will win. And when that person wins, they get that dopamine boost and says, wow, that feels really good. Now I'm on that winning streak. Now life is getting better. And oftentimes it doesn't. Because when you win, It tricks the brain into thinking now you have some element of control, that life is now better. And oftentimes you're not going to stop when you're on a winning streak. And also a gambler will not stop when they're on a losing streak. So a gambler will only stop when they run out of money oftentimes. That's the only time they'll stop. So it's that nature of gambling, which is an intermittent reward schedule. It's hard to give things up where it makes you feel good every so often. So what is not at ease? Let's think about this a little bit more. Oftentimes the addiction is the solution, not the problem. Remember, there's a country song, and in North Carolina, and maybe someone will appreciate this. Midland is a good country band. I do like my country music. And they had a song called Drinking Problem. And one of the lines of the song said, people say I've got a drinking problem. I've got no problem drinking at all. And that's true. A person with a drinking problem has no problem putting alcohol up to their lips. They can do it, unfortunately, very easily. They continue in the song to say, they call it a problem, I call it a solution. Now we're getting somewhere. You see, what someone might perceive as a drinking problem, this person might perceive as a drinking solution. I don't have a gambling problem. Gambling is the solution to all my problems. So you're coming at it from two different standpoints. And oftentimes the solution is to the deeper underlying issue. Another great country singer, Chris Stapleton, has a line from his song, I drink because I'm lonesome, and I'm lonesome because I drink. Hear the paradox there. I drink because I'm lonesome, yet I'm lonesome because I drink. And so his drinking is a solution to being lonesome, but it's also perpetuating his lonesomeness or his loneliness. So I think there's a lot of power in music, and those are just two elements or two lines that really jump out to me when I listen, but they're very deep. They're full of information that I kind of ponder. And what we realize is that if the drug of choice is the solution to a deeper problem, this could be because the individual doesn't have the right tools, was never taught the right way to handle. And all of a sudden now they have this pain that they're trying to escape from, this pain that they just don't know how to deal with, this negative mood state they're trying to escape. And the only thing they know is maybe a learned behavior that they saw as a child, maybe something they grew up with friends at a critical time and they just kept that habit, and that habit turned into a daily activity, which turned into a problem, which turned into an addiction or a solution. You see, sometimes things just kind of stay with us longer than intended. And so we really want to drill down even further. When we talk about addiction is the solution to the problem, and the problem is maybe a negative mood state or some type of, as you can see at the bottom, unresolved pain. So let's drill deeper to what is pain. Well, pain tells us something's wrong. We don't have to be rocket scientists to figure that out. You know, if I stub my toe, it hurts. I get pain sensors, ouch. If someone hurts me emotionally, or I cry, I'm in pain. There's emotional pain, right? There's different types of pain. C.S. Lewis, very eloquent, said pain is the megaphone to rouse a deaf world. That's another way of looking at it, right? But when you have a lot of pain, you may generally think that other people can't relate to what you're going through. We see a lot of that in the world we live in today, whether it's people who are isolated or struggling with symptoms of COVID-19, with loss of loved ones, whether it's the situation that's been unfolding the last several days that we're seeing in the cities and the towns around us in this country. There's a lot of inner pain, and there's a lot of people that are lashing out, and what they're doing is there's a lot of anger as a result of that pain, right? But always remember, we'll see in a couple slides, anger is a secondary emotion. Anger is not the primary emotion. So as much anger as we're seeing right now in the streets around us, in these towns, on TV, we're seeing so much anger. It's because there's deeper pain. There's fear. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So when we look at pain, there was a great book I read. It's called Coming Clean. Author's name is Seth Haynes. Book is Coming Clean. Relatively short book, fairly easy read. And he talked about pain in a way that I had never seen before, which I thought was interesting. Wanted to share that here. Talked about pain in three concepts: the shapes of pain. And, people will seek to soothe and ease pain, right? We want to avoid pain. Nobody likes to be in pain, but pain does have a quality that's refining, and we can learn from it. The one shape of pain is scarcity. So the concept of scarcity pain is that a person never has enough, that they always want more. There's no peace, there's no rest until they achieve. And the problem is it's a moving target. And the more they achieve, the more they want. And they suffer from this pain of just scarcity. They're afraid they will never have enough. You see this oftentimes as in the spouse of the person who was a gambling addict, someone who struggled with gambling disorder. The spouse might be experiencing this shape of pain of scarcity because so much has been taken from the spouse. Also, people who are hoarders, people who hoard, that's a struggle because they feel as if they will never have enough. They always want more. Another shape of pain is abuse. And that's physical, emotional, verbal. That could be a household you've grown up in. This concept that nobody is safe. I have to now protect everyone. I want to super control everything around me. Again, we see that in the loved ones and family members of those who struggle with addiction. Just like scarcity for gambling, abuse can be gambling, drugs, alcohol. So you see how important it is to always address and work with the family members, because even though we're talking about gambling disorder or addiction or substance use disorder, we shall never forget that the family members are tremendously impacted. And if we're not working with the family members, we're not doing our part to promote a sustained and meaningful long-term recovery, not just for the individual who's struggling, but for the unit as a whole. You see, we focus so often on a sustained and meaningful long-term recovery for the individual who's suffering from the addiction, but isn't it wiser to focus on the unit as a whole, the family unit? Because when you can strengthen the family unit instead of just the one individual, that's the essence of recovery. It's relational. It's family. It's bonding. And so we need to really think about the procedure and the insight that we give the person who's struggling with addiction to really incorporate the family members. And it's not easy. Some family members, you'll oftentimes hear them say, it's their problem. It's not my problem. You fix the individual who's broken, and then I'll come along once they're better. And this is language we hear oftentimes. It's not easy, but I just want to give you a different way and even reinforce maybe a way that you're thinking of it to say, yes, keep pushing forward. We do need to involve the whole family unit because that's critical and paramount to a sustained and meaningful long-term recovery. The third shape of pain is loss or grief, the feeling that you have always been alone and always will be alone. We see that with the loss of a loved one. We see that when there's death, divorce, devastation, isolation. And we feel like things will never change, never get better. Those are three shapes of pain that Seth Haynes talks about. So let's summarize that here. How does pain tie in? When you have deep pain, unresolved deep pain could be from trauma, adverse childhood experiences where the negative experiences outweigh the positive, so it's net adverse even. You have deep pain, PTSD, abuse, and then you also add in the fact that there's no mechanism to deal with it. Maybe life skills weren't taught, maybe coping skills weren't taught. We don't know what a person brings with them along their journey, right? We meet someone, we don't know what they're fishing. We have to see their fishing pole. We don't know what's in their tackle box, right? We don't know what's in their toolbox. I always use tools, so today I want to use tackle box. It's summertime, maybe we should go on fishing, right? So we've got to fill their tackle box with something. We've got to fill the toolbox with something. But when you have deep pain and no mechanism to deal with it, that's when you see the escape into drugs, alcohol, gambling, because that temporary escape allows that person more time, right? It allows a person more time, which is never guaranteed. It's never promised. We assume time. We assume that I'll say, tomorrow I'll take care of this. That's never guaranteed. And that's one of the elements, and that's where we kind of see procrastination start coming in. Don't want to deal with the pain, don't know how to deal with the pain, I'll just deal with it tomorrow. You start seeing people just never deal with pain. They never deal with these issues. So it's important to realize life will do what life does. We're seeing that right now. Life does what life does. And when it does, it brings hurt and it brings pain. We know, this world is not promised to be absent of pain or hurt. It's quite the opposite, actually. So we all go through these pain points. And so when we're dealing with people who struggle with addiction, for clinicians on this webinar today, or for family members who have a loved one who's struggling with addiction, don't just ask why the addiction. Also try to understand why the pain at that deeper level. I'll give you another observation. If anyone has a lawn, they cut the grass. When you cut your lawn, the lawnmower does a great job of doing what? Taking off the top surface. We don't want to be lawnmowers all the time. Because what happens is if there's weeds in the lawnmower will do a great job of cutting off those weeds. And when you look at someone's lawn from far away, it may look green from the distance, because all those weeds were taken off. It looks relatively green. But when you get a little bit closer to that lawn, you start seeing brown spots, you start seeing weeds, you start seeing, you're like, okay, it's not as good as I thought it was, right? So instead of just being a lawnmower, because a lawnmower takes off that top layer, but what the lawnmower then does is takes those seedlings that are in the weeds, sprinkles them to the other parts of the good part of the lawn. And so now 2 weeks later, with a little bit of rain, a little bit of more growth, now you got some weeds popping up in other areas of the lawn. Do you see the metaphor I'm using here for life? And so what we want to always be aware of is that when we're talking about addiction and the roots, there's a pastor that one time said, you can't produce good fruit without having a good root. And so what we need to always be mindful of and aware of is taking out the roots, those weeds that are in the life, taking it out by the root, getting that long root out, and then watering regularly, using the tools that we're given, right? Fertilizing, talking to sponsors, talking to people, care, community, and connection, the 3 C's, right? And then all of a sudden maintaining a healthier lawn or life because we're digging deep and doing the hard work. We're all hardwired for a pleasure buzz from risky events. But what's risky to one person may not be risky to another. You know, it's kind of funny. I had a friend of mine who was in recovery from gambling, and now he loves jumping out of airplanes. That's a risky event. Someone else who grew up jumping out of airplanes, you know, he doesn't see it as risky. To me, I see it as risky. He's perfectly comfortable with it. So we have to always keep in mind, risk is relative. A lot of things are relative. Risk is relative, okay? So how do we untangle the web of pain? Sir Walter Scott always says, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. First, let's take a look at pain in today's youth, though. So what we see a lot of times in today's youth, if you're dealing with youth and adolescents, not only do we have the concern over COVID-19, because today's youth they're starting to get frustrated like adults. They pick up cues from parents, from adults. They watch a lot of TV. They have a lot of screen time. We've talked about that early on in coronavirus pandemic on various webinars and workshops, both with various states. I think North Carolina was one also. And they lash out, right? And it can come in many different forms. But youth today, when they have pain, they feel that I am not blank enough. You know, I'm not enough. The whole concept of I am not enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm not strong enough. You know, so they have a lot of these questions. Who am I? Self-esteem and identity issues. That's why you see kids that play a lot of video gaming. They find their identity and their self-esteem through their avatar on a video game console. You'll see that oftentimes. I was actually just watching, I guess it was last night, I was watching a few more episodes of a great Netflix series now, All American. And in one of those aspects of the show, one of the characters is in recovery from alcohol misuse, 1 year anniversary. And now she's attending an event and a function, and they asked her to write down an answer to a simple question. Who am I? And she even said in the show, she goes, I couldn't even answer that question. And that's a question that if I'm doing this workshop in person, we take a little time and I hand out a piece of paper to folks in the room. And all I want you to do is say, who am I? And then do some writing. Because who are we? We don't know. Right? Sometimes it takes time. If I can't answer who I am, how do I expect my child or the folks I work with that are younger to answer who they are if I don't even know who I am or what my purpose is? And what's funny about the pain that we see in today's youth is that there's so much social media overload, so much. We're so connected. Even in COVID, people are still so very connected socially through digital and electronic devices, yet we're so disconnected from other things, including our inner self. You know, Robbie was mentioning before, I was outside hiking this weekend. I was out with my girlfriend and we had a great time. And it was just so nice to be out in nature for 2-3 hours, just being out. And this was a really good trail. Like we maybe saw 7 other family units the entire 3 hours we were out there. It was just nothing out there. It was beautiful. Woods, birds, unfortunately a couple of ticks, but all in all, a good day. But that was getting connected back to the inner self with no distraction, no outside world. Do you take that time to disconnect from your phone and get reconnected with yourself, to get reconnected with your family, with your loved ones, with your friends? Do you have a No Tech Tuesday policy in your home where the kids put away the technology, where they sit down for dinner and you just talk? Just some ideas and things that I've heard other families do. And Those are questions that I like to ask. So there was a poll put out by the Washington Post a couple of years ago, and the question asked, what are you afraid of? We're talking about fear. We're talking about pain. We're talking about fear. And they said Americans who say the number one answer was they fear public speaking. The very thing that I'm doing now, that Robbie does, that some of you probably do as well, Americans mostly fear public speaking. What's interesting is if you look a little bit further down, you see all the other elements: flying, claustrophobia. I don't see death. So Jerry Seinfeld in one of his comedy acts said, what this is really saying is that, you'd rather be the one in the casket than the one giving the eulogy at a funeral if you are so afraid of public speaking. A little funny observation there. So let's talk a little bit more about fear. And let's first realize it's okay to experience fear. Fear is an emotion that we can experience. We're given the right to experience fear. No one's saying don't be scared about anything. There's a lot of things to fear in the world, right? But the difference is, though, it's okay to experience it, but just let it have its proper place in your life. Don't let it take up too much brain space. Don't let it consume you, right? Just like it's okay to plan for tomorrow, but don't get so lost in those plans where those plans are held so rigidly that as soon as those plans are disrupted, your life is now disrupted. Plans should be held loosely, right? It's okay to experience fear, but don't let it consume you. We always tend to fixate on the worst case scenario. We don't have to do that. When fear hits, ask yourself, what is true now? This is a critical bullet point for anyone who suffers from a lot of anxiety and fear. Ask yourself, what is true now? What do you know to be true right now? I am standing in my living room. My feet are on the ground. I am safe in this space right now, right? That's what's true for me right now, right? If there was something that I was fearing. So it's an important concept to just kind of ground yourself and be in the present, because if we're tending to fixate on the worst case scenario, we're not in the present. But that's also what happens physiologically to our bodies. We go into fight or flight and we lose that ability. We lose the ability to imagine a safer place. We lose the ability to imagine safety, to calm ourselves down. And we tend to start hyperanalyzing, overthinking, and thinking about the worst case scenario. It's a form of trauma, because when you have trauma, you're constantly pulled back into the past. And when you're constantly pulling yourself back into the past, you can't identify what's true now. And you can't envision a better tomorrow. So these are three elements, past, present, and future, that when we talk about fear, they're all at play. We're constantly pulled into the past. We're not able to live in the present. And therefore, I can't even think about or envision a better tomorrow. So that's why ground yourself. Where am I? Who am I? Be present. What is true now? Anger we talked about before. Anger is a secondary emotion. There's so much anger right now that we see on the news. It's a secondary emotion. It protects and it insulates us from deeper vulnerability. There's a lot of primary emotions that underlie anger. One of the things we work with in New Jersey a lot of times are youth in correctional facilities, youth detention facilities, prison inmates, and we see a lot of anger. And oftentimes we try to teach people some life skills around dealing with anger. And oftentimes we just encourage responding instead of reacting. Building in that 5 to 10 second delay, as opposed to just the knee-jerk reaction that may be the reason why they got themselves in trouble in the first place. Break those habits, break those behaviors, break the chain. Break the very same things that have led you up to this point in your life that you keep going back, recidivism, back and back, and you keep following that cycle, that endless cycle. Only you have the power to break that chain. And we try to teach people about where their anger stems from. We ask people, what do you feel beneath the anger? Because here's this anger, here's the feelings iceberg. Anger's at the top. We see anger, right? We see it now on TV more than ever. We see anger. But what we don't see below the surface, we don't see a person's anxiety, a person's fear. We don't see the embarrassment, the helplessness, the hurt, the frustration and sadness. And so when someone's anger, it's really funny when we identify and say, I'm so sorry that you're so angry. Yet it could very well be instead saying, I'm so sorry that you are so scared. I'm so sorry that you are so hurt. You're so frustrated. that you feel so helpless, because that's what's going on oftentimes underneath the anger. And honestly, if you were to look at all of these 7 items at the base below the anger, oftentimes it is fear. The fear of embarrassment leads to anger. The fear of being hurt leads to anger. The fear of the anxiety coming on strong again leads to the anger. Fear drives a lot of it. I hope this is really helpful for you folks today, because, like Robbie was saying before, you're in a workshop, you can see faces, you can see nods, you can see approval, or questions and stuff. So I'm just hoping that you're able to take something away from this as we move forward. We have about 20 minutes left. Adverse childhood experiences. I do want to talk about adverse childhood experiences, because a lot of times people who are struggling later on in life, it stems from early childhood, adverse childhood experiences. And what's important is that when I reread this, I don't know, maybe about 6 months ago, I read this slide differently. I've had this slide for over 2.5 years, and I finally read it differently. And here's what I read. Childhood experiences, both positive and negative, have a tremendous impact on future violence. Both positive and negative. For so long, I only focused on the negative experiences. Adverse, negative, right? That's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking of almost like when someone gets sentenced to prison, right? What are the aggravating circumstances? What are the mitigating circumstances? The judge looks at both, and he renders a decision based upon both. Well, why this came to me because I was thinking about why one person, 2 children who grow up in the same household, witness the same things, can have 2 totally different trajectories for their life. You have perhaps the daughter who sees the abuse, who sees the alcohol use, the physical abuse, the violence. The brother sees the same thing. But maybe the daughter had different people in her circle that gave her some more positive that maybe the brother didn't have, and their life goes in 2 different trajectories. So adverse childhood experiences is a combination of both positive and negative, almost like the scales that you see. How many positive, how many negative? How much does one outweigh the other? And that's why I've started thinking about it more. But in either event, it's true that early experiences are such an important part of one element that impacts future behavior, right? So if we do have unresolved trauma, it's important to connect at the end of the day, ACEs with addiction. It's funny, we think about, why would that be the case? Think of it from a different perspective. Think about the marshmallow test done in the 1960s out of Stanford University. For those of you that aren't familiar, a professor by the name of Walter Mischel, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, conducted a longitudinal study, followed these young individuals over 20 to 40 years. And the whole goal was to talk about delay versus instant gratification. And in the study, what he did is put a marshmallow or put something in front of the children and said, if you eat you can either have one right now, or if you wait a certain amount of time, you can have 2. So do you want to just immediately gratify yourself now, or do you have the patience, the endurance, the long suffering, any word you want to use, to wait a little while, and then you get a bigger reward? And what his conclusions were after following these subjects longitudinally for decades was that those that were able to delay gratification later on in life also tended to have lower rates of obesity, lower substance use issues, better social skills. Those that wanted immediate gratification, they wanted that marshmallow now, they tended to be the opposite, tended to have higher rates of obesity, poor social skills, and higher rates of substance use disorder. So if we know that childhood impact can carry forward in that capacity, certainly one has to argue and can draw a reasonable conclusion that if someone experiences childhood abuse or neglect at an early age, you're certainly going to carry that with you into adulthood. And when life throws you a curveball, you might tend to go back to those things that made you feel good in childhood. So if a child experienced the taste of alcohol or liquor at the age of 10 because it was with mom and dad and it was a fun experience, when life throws a curveball, they may remember that. Remember the gambling. They might remember something else that was occurring in the household. Maybe they always thought dad was happy after he smoked a joint, after he took drugs, right? It's learned behavior. What we know about addiction in general is that it's biopsychosocial. We also know it stems from, it can kind of manifest itself from that dis-ease What is now creating this disease within me that I need to find the solution of addiction? So you see how it's multifaceted. There's never one answer, but it's important to make the connections where we can. The next few slides talk about what the childhood adverse experiences are, neglect and growing up in homes, etc. This slide is from The Body Keeps the Score with Bessel van der Kolk. It's a hard one to say quickly. Bessel van der Kolk. And it's called The Body Keeps the Score. I recommend it. Talks about ACEs in one element of the book, talks about the physiological impact that trauma and stress have on the body. One of the lines in the book that always sticks out to me is that trauma lives in the body and has no voice. And it's fascinating when you think about traumatic events and experiences, it can come out in a heartbeat. I share with people regularly my background. I was in finance and economics. I worked at Goldman Sachs in 1998 through 2003. And I was downtown on September 11th. I watched that second plane hit the towers, watched people jumping out of buildings, and watched bodies hit the pavement. And, you know, every time I talk about that, I get the hairs start standing up on my arm. And trauma lives in the body. I know in early September, I don't feel well. I know, you know, and it's been now, it'll be 20 years next September. And so it's important to realize that these traumatic things can come about from a scent, from a look, from a smile, from anything. Senses are powerful and they trigger those responses in the brain. And sometimes we don't know when it will happen. So it's important to realize that trauma does live in the body and the physiological impact can be substantial. As we talk about early childhood, adverse childhood experiences, it's important to realize that the more adverse childhood experiences someone experiences, we're setting this person potentially up for a path that ultimately leads in disease, social problems, and perhaps early death. That's why it's important to address these early. It's important to go through them early. As the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk for all of the following here, whether it's gambling, alcohol misuse, illicit drug use, depression, risk for sexual violence, etc. There's so many different areas. So what do we do? So if we're talking about recovery from trauma, some tips for healing the self. Always remember, trauma steals the feeling from being in control. It does. Constantly pulls us back into the past. So one of the goals that's mentioned in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is to reestablish ownership over the self in terms of your feelings and emotions without becoming overwhelmed, ashamed, or threatened. You often have to do this with some clinical intervention, some therapeutic intervention. Hard for a person to do that on their own, to be in a safe place, to be in a safe space. What we do know in dealing with patients with trauma, clients with trauma, is that it has to be done in a safe space. You have to unpack the trauma and you have to pack it back up properly also. And if there's any trauma therapists that are on today's webinar, they'll understand this as well. If you're not a trauma therapist or someone who's accustomed to working with folks who are dealing with trauma, PTSD or severe trauma, my recommendation has always been find a person who is and connect with them. Have coffee with that individual. Meet with them virtually now during this time. And if you're not comfortable in handling that, give it to that person, because you can almost do more damage not processing and helping a person work through, and they can be worse off than when they came in to see you. So additional points on trauma. Trauma leads to the concept of emotional numbness, right? Just kind of not able to feel anything. It changes people's perceptions and imaginations. Trauma is something for the person who's struggling that this event didn't happen in the past. Rather, it's leaving an imprint on the day-to-day mind, body, and brain. It means that they think it's continuing to happen to them in the present as well. It's always important that the individual needs to know that the danger has passed and that they are safe and that they are in the reality of the present. So that's an important concept to grasp as well. So in the last bit of time we have here, let's take a look here at some principles of a meaningful recovery. I'm not talking about therapeutic strategies or CBT or DBT or EMDR, but I'm just saying in general, what are some guiding principles that can help improve a person's chance of a sustained and meaningful long-term recovery? This is the quote I've used a few times today, and I think it's valuable to see it in a slide. This came from Dr. Robert DuPont, the founding president of the Institute for Behavioral Health. And it's important because what we know from Dr. Mee Lee with the ASAM criteria is that when you develop a treatment plan for a client, he'll always ask the question, whose treatment plan is it? Is it the clinician's treatment plan or is it the client's treatment plan? And it's always the client's treatment plan. It should be in language the client agrees to. It should be in language the client understands. And it should have goals that are attainable based upon the client's tools and life skills that they're bringing to the table. It can't be cookie cutter, has to be tailored and unique. So the end goal of treatment is working towards that sustained and meaningful long-term recovery. A couple of observations about treatment and recovery, though. Always remember the negative thoughts are the things that keep us trapped. I'm not blank enough. I'll never get this. I've failed in the past. It's all that negative self-talk that's so destructive. Instead, we always have to remember it's those positive intentions set us free. So for every negative thought that keeps us trapped, we need a positive intention to set us free. I didn't work out yesterday. Negative thought. Today's going to be different. Today I'm going to work out. Positive intention. It frees me from that negative thought. Every positive intention I say frees me from the negative thought that had me trapped. Awareness is not enough. It's not enough to say, I know I need to exercise more. I know I need to learn more, right? You know it here. But what about here? The motivation's needed. As I mentioned earlier, in GA fellowship, they don't tell you to stop gambling. They tell you have to have a desire to stop gambling. Someone with a gambling problem who goes to a GA room, I'll tell you right now, they know they have a gambling problem. They know it. They wouldn't be in their room if they didn't, because their spouse made them go, or they got sick and tired of being sick and tired. They didn't want to lose another dollar. They know that what they're doing is wrong. What they're doing is not right. It's making them feel any number of reasons. The solution to that deeper problem, it ain't working. But what they need is that motivation to continue, keep that pilot light of desire lit inside their belly so that on a daily basis, they can continue to have that motivation. See, that's the pilot light that's needed. And that's called hope. See, hope is that thing that allows us to imagine a better tomorrow. Hope is that thing that says, I can't see it, but I know it's there. There's something better waiting. And that's the pilot light. And when you talk about addiction, you can't help but not talk about suicide. Because when that pilot light is extinguished, or it gets really dim, that's when the real danger starts to occur. When that desire starts to really fall apart, because the pilot light is getting dim. That's why it's so vital early on to not just medicate those who are in recovery from an addiction or a drug of choice, right? Medication is oftentimes needed and may very well be necessary, 100%. However, it's not the only thing that's needed. You can't medicate your way to sobriety for the rest of your life. You also have to learn life skills and tools along the way, if for nothing else, that the body adapts. And over time, you can't take a sustained, prolonged use of certain medications. You need to, over time, find those life skills and tools to help you along your journey. We want to develop an attitude of recovery. We want to ensure that people instill humility and gratitude and mindfulness. This is an attitude of recovery, everything that's on the left. The stuff on the right is the stuff that's kind of missing when a person's really struggling with addiction or with the dis-ease, right? They're just not happy with their relationships. They're isolated, not happy. They have a lot of hate and neglect, right? So we want to instill that attitude of recovery. We want to ask hard questions. What is true sobriety? What is true sobriety? You ever ask that question? What is recovery? Is it just simply going to a meeting and sitting there with your arms folded and not sharing? Is a person embracing their own recovery? Are they being forced to go when they don't want to? Are they showing up early? Are they going with a good spirit? Are they going willingly? It's funny, you can tell somebody to do something and they'll do it out of compliance, following the rule. But if they don't have a relationship with it, you really think they're going to stay long? No. One of my favorite phrases that I always use in every workshop, rules without relationships leads to rebellion. Rules without relationships leads to rebellion. If you spend so much time focusing on the rules only and yelling the rules louder, and you don't take the time to develop a relationship, the person's going to rebel. You can have a small child that listens to rules because that's their rule followers. You yell at them, they do what you're told. They do what they're told to do. What happens when that 7-year-old young child turns 17 and they're 27 and you're yelling rules if you're a parent? You think they're going to get the same response? Nope. Rules without relationships leads to rebellion. Same thing for someone who's maybe working through a 12-step recovery program. If they just see the rules on a piece of paper, but they don't take the time to develop a relationship as to why it matters how it's going to improve their life, developing a life where the addiction no longer fits in, instead of always trying to just keep it out. It's a big difference. You want to create a new life where it no longer fits in, as opposed to just creating a life or living in a life where you're always trying to push it away. That's a hard life to live. So what is true sobriety versus recovery? Got to get people properly attached. Here's some principles from SAMHSA 2012 of a meaningful recovery. You can find this on SAMHSA. I also have additional slides on this that I could drill down further. If anyone wants, I can send them to you. But it talks about the concept of it being person-driven, right? Having many pathways. It makes sense. Can't use one tool to do a job. If I only had a hammer in my house and I had to screw a screw in the wall, well, if I only had a hammer, that's all I could use. I need a toolbox. Each tool has a different purpose. Just like in recovery, everyone serves a different purpose. You have family, you have 12-step mutual aid support groups, you might have therapeutic intervention with a clinician, you might have a faith-based organization, you might have an online meeting forum, right? You have phone, you have a sponsor. Everyone serves a different purpose, right? We talked about before, cultivating a recovery culture. Talked about the principles of recovery, but these are some things that just are really key. You know, you got to start putting other people first. You have to learn to laugh again. When someone's in recovery from addiction, that solution of addiction, you know, they lose that ability to laugh, you know, when they're in the act of addiction. You got to bring laughter back, levity, right? Learning how to respond instead of reacting. That helps address the anger issue, right? Care and connection, feeling safe, whatever that means for an individual, feeling safe. Teaching life skills, helping a person find their identity again. That's a tough one. That's one that needs help. That's one that where there's therapeutic intervention and counseling that really helps. Who am I? What is my purpose in life? You know, those questions are best thought about with the help of someone else who's neutral, third party. Why don't people seek treatment? Well, we talk about how nice treatment would be and the recovery solution. It all looks great. But the truth is that when you have a change related to someone's thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, it might be some resistance. You could be, if you're focusing on stages of change, you might find yourself in the action phase telling someone how to fix a problem that they don't even know they have because they're still in pre-contemplation. And that conversation goes nowhere. I'm sitting here saying, you need to stop gambling. It's causing problems in your family. What are you talking about? I don't gamble that much. I don't understand what you're talking about. So you got to be on the same page, right? Especially for gambling, that intermittent reward outcome is often hard to break. It's difficult to abandon that. Also for people who are known as the gambler or the person who is the partier or supplies the good time, whatever it might be, it could be their sense of purpose and identity. And there's also this concept that there's this harsh realization that the last period of time, whether it's weeks, months, years, decades, whatever it is, has been wasted. That's hard. Come to grips with that. I've just lost 10 years of my life. Gambling, prison, you know, drinking, prison, whatever it might be. That's hard to realize that wasted time and energy. And then they have to redefine themselves. Oftentimes you also see lack of availability, the attitude, the uncertainty. Some people don't have transportation. We have to try to reduce barriers where we can to the best of our abilities. And the true barriers. Sometimes you have people who say, I just don't feel like it. You know, they're creating their own barriers. We can help them to some degree, but it's really difficult sometimes to get someone, you know, to force them to go to treatment. You know, there has to be some willingness also on their end at some point along the process. Okay. So as we go through here and we wrap up, strengths for recovery, as we mentioned before, when you start having relationships, social support, and as I mentioned, don't focus on keeping the addiction out. Focus on create a new life, establish those meaningful relationships, gainful and meaningful employment, and also a commitment to change, a transformation. There's a difference between change and transformation. You know, when you're changing, it's something that's a little more temporary, outward. Transformation is from within. When you want to transform, that's almost the language I prefer to use. You know, we want to transform someone's life. I don't want to just change it. Change might be temporary. I change my clothes when I come home from work, my workout clothes. I change them again. I'm always changing something. Change a light bulb. When it burns out, you change it again. But to transform something means to make anew, right? To really strip down and rebuild. That's transformational. Always use importance, language as well. Language can be stigmatizing. It can influence how a person's viewed, can influence self-identity. So always be aware on the importance of language. And last but not least, a couple of summary of recovery principles. I'll leave these open for people to read while I wrap up. Robbie, 12:58. I did my best, but only 2 or 3 minutes, so I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, man.
That's what I got for today.
Oh, very good talk. I think it's very, like you said in the opening, and I've got a few things I want to share. It might run over if you're good with that, Dan, but
I am, buddy. Yeah, that's cool.
okay. I really liked what you opened with. Just starting from there, if I might put my 2 cents in, is you might can shut down, casinos and gambling, but you really can't shut down the disease, the disorder, whatever you want to call this thing, right? I'm not into labels, but you're right. And if anyone's familiar with 12, being in 12-step groups or being hearing things that clients perhaps might say from 12-step facilitation, a lot of times you might hear this, that alcohol doesn't have anything to do with their alcohol use disorder, or gambling doesn't have anything to do with that. It's what's inside and why they're doing it, right? It's the pain that you spoke about. So if that makes sense. So I really enjoyed how you dug deeper today, and it's very relevant in what we're saying. So there's been a lot of commentary, and I almost checked in with you at 20 minutes when you kind of checked in to let you know that you've gotten a lot of great positive feedback and gotten people thinking. And I
Good.
think too, with what's going on, with what was said about what's happening in our great country, is we're seeing the result of some things, uh, some deeper lying things. Does that have to do with just one thing? I think it's a lot of accumulation. Just like addiction, it's coming from perhaps a whole lot of things, a whole lot of reasons: pain, trauma, biology, genetics, you name it. So, but anyways, with that, I'll get off my deal here. Very, very good talk today. I'll start off with the questions. 2 questions. One, thank you for your comments, Linda. She first opened with, the addiction tree is a great model that depicts what you are sharing presently. And she said that she likes to teach folks that anger serves to motivate us when we're fearing the potential loss of worth, respect, control, image, control of life. When we stop to actually understand that, instead of fighting back, we could potentially stop the cycle of conflict. Instead of personalizing someone's anger, try to seek to understand, which is very good, versus just looking at the surface. So that was a comment from Linda. Thank you. Your comments about trauma are spot on. Yep. Let's see here. And let me read the chats for you.
Just a real quick point, just to add on, Linda. It's so funny because when you talk about human nature is the number one thing people love to talk about is themselves, and that's human nature. And when you start talking about the conflict, that almost goes in the polar opposite direction of seek first to understand someone else. And so, very simply, what I've always told my kids growing up is that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as often or twice as much as we speak.
Yeah.
And you can learn so much from someone by saying nothing. You don't have to think about your comeback. You don't have to think about what you're going to say while they're speaking. Be comfortable in the silence. Be comfortable as you absorb what they just said, and then formulate a response based on the entirety of their conversation. But unfortunately, what we see is this is such a fast-paced environment. We need to be quick to debate, quick to have a reply, quick to have an answer. I still think slow to speak, quick to listen is the best way to go.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that is true. That's a struggle myself, if you can't tell. I love to, and I think we all do. It's something that we want to put our 2 cents in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
right.
So I'll get back to the chats. And one other thing I do want to say, I heard this last week, and I don't, because I don't want to say this is anything original, but you spoke on mindfulness, and I thought it was very important. But I heard someone last week say, I really enjoy this moment. I've never been here before, and I'm excited about it. I want to love it and live it and feel it right now, right? Yeah. So,
yeah, that's nice. I like that.
Yeah, because of just everything that comes in about fears of the future, regrets of the past, whatever, or however you want to position that. So when you were speaking on that, I thought about what I had heard from my friend that said that I'm so excited to be in this moment. I've never been here. And I wanted to say, wait a minute, haven't you? And then I thought, oh, yeah. So very good. So when you were speaking on mindfulness, that came to me. So here's some other, some comments, Dan, maybe a question here or there, but very good comments. Excellent point. Well, let me go back to Darlene. Darlene says she covers her pain with solitude. Valerie says, excellent point on technology. The more, I think this is when you were talking about, what did you call it, Dan? No Technology Tuesday? Was that?
Oh yeah, No Tech Tuesday,
Dude, I
right?
like
Just
that.
trying to
Yeah.
strip it away and come back together.
I like that.
Yeah.
The more we're into technology, the less time we use to explore ourselves. Really good.
Very good point.
Yes, very good. Let's see here. Very, very good today. Okay, a great book to read right now. This comes, hey, Allison, thank you. A great book to read right now is My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. Address racialized trauma and pathways to mending our bodies and hearts, really helping and understand that we must retrain our nervous system, which you spoke on as well. The imprint, I liked that great analogy you used there, Dan. Great, yep. Wonderful presentation. Great job. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely one of the most important, impactful presentations I've heard in 30 years. You got to like that. Thank you, Valerie. Very nice.
Valerie.
Yeah. And this was a great webinar. You put a great new perspective on the information from Susan. And Valerie appreciates everything. And like I said, yes, Dan, as I always say, you position it nicely with great passion. And I think it's a very relevant and needed talk, not just with everything we're seeing if we turn on our TV right now in the different cities across the nation, but I think with COVID, and I agree with you, I think what we're seeing is connected to that. And it's just not COVID. It's just not maybe the current administration or who's in Congress or here or that. I think it's an accumulation of things, as you said, just like addiction. I think it's a lot of stuff. It can be trauma, biology, which includes, genetic predisposition, maybe something that happened, who knows, but it's all the things and how it comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, Robbie. This has been a great time. I appreciate the opportunity and just great commentary. Great having everyone on, and hopefully everyone took something away that they can apply either professionally or personally, because that's the most important thing, right? Taking a nugget that you can apply and you said, wow, you know what? I can now use this. That's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we appreciate it. And as we both already said, Dan, I've enjoyed working with you, and we'll work again together for sure. Okay, man?
Looking forward to it. Look forward to hopefully coming back to North Carolina soon too.
Okay. All right. Everybody have a safe and healthy week. Okay. And thank you for being on. And then I'll talk to you guys. I think it's next week, June 11th on SBIRT. Okay. Thank you and have a great day. See you, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, buddy.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye-bye.